Is Bob Dylan a good harmonica player?
I just saw the Bob Dylan movie, A Complete Unknown, and I absolutely loved it. As an artist, as a musician, as a creative person, it's incredibly inspiring. If you haven't seen it yet, don't sleep on it. Anyways, for years, people have been asking me to do a Bob Dylan harmonica lesson, and I've always thought, just blow and draw haphazardly. I'm kidding, Bob Dylan doesn't just blow haphazardly on his harmonica. And boy, some of you are brutal about this, describing him as discordant and grating and haphazard and aggressive and piercing and, well, you get the drift. Ouch. So what's the deal? Is Bob Dylan actually a good harmonica player? Am I wrong on brushing him off as a harp player? To find out, I grilled 2 industry pros. But first, we need to talk about Timothée Chalamet. Because watching him become Dylan made me wonder, I wonder if Timothée Chalamet actually likes playing the harmonica.
Love playing the harmonica. It's the perfect thing to pull out of a party.
The thing is, there's a massive difference between looking like you can play and actually being able to play the harmonica. And with Dylan, that line gets complicated. So I've got questions, lots of them. Let's bring in the pros. The first person I'm hitting up is my friend Ross Garren. Who is Ross Garren, you ask? What do Beyonce, Bon Iver, Kesha, Ben Folds, and Timothée Chalamet all have in common? They've all hired Ross to play on their projects. Ross is the #1 harmonica session player in Los Angeles. If you saw Timothée Chalamet playing on Saturday Night Live, that was Ross Garren playing harmonica with him. I know Ross Garren played harmonica on the soundtrack to A Complete Unknown, so I thought he might have some insight into Timmy's harmonica playing.
He really impressed me because, for me it was a big task just to get the harmonica together for those recordings. At the time I worked with him, he could play in a recognizable fashion some of the melodies, and I'm sure by the time Rob and Shooting came around, it really advanced quite a bit from there.
Okay, now that name Rob that Ross just mentioned, that's the great East Coast session player Rob Paparozzi, who was Timothée Chalamet's harmonica coach while filming on set in New York City. Rob is a harmonica virtuoso who has toured with Dolly Parton, George Jones, the original Blues Brothers band, Blood, Sweat and Tears, and many others. One of the things I was curious to find out from both of these masters is if we're hearing in the movie what Timothée actually played on set. I've seen interviews where Chalamet talks about the fact that he's playing guitar and singing.
Yeah, it was the most unique challenge I've taken on, but that where my confidence came through is eventually doing all the music live, Maybe it was the least responsible thing on the actor's part because the music exists and the performances exist.
And when I see the movie, it seems like he's actually playing guitar and singing. But as a student of the harmonica for over 30 years, I can't help but notice that it doesn't look like his lips are precisely where they ought to be for what I'm hearing come out of the harmonica. And I also notice that every time he starts playing harmonica, it very quickly cuts to a shot of him from behind or a pan through faces in the crowd, anything but him actually playing the harmonica. Ross Garren is like the most humble man on the planet, so when I asked him about this, he simply said,
I only know my side. If you want to really get in depth with that, you'd probably have to talk with the music producer.
But Rob Paparozzi helped to shed some light here.
Remember that one scene where he's in Gertie's Folk City and he's looking at Joan Baez and saying some stuff into the mic?
Baez, folks. But she's pretty. Sings pretty.
That song was called I Was Young When I Left Home. Well, I played it on the soundtrack when you listen to it. But in the movie, I said, that doesn't sound like me, but it sounds like Timmy, and it's pretty darn good. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's pretty good.
So on the soundtrack, you're definitely hearing Ross Garren playing the harmonica, with Rob Paparozzi adding some harmonica on When I Was Young, I Left Home. And I think it's a pretty safe bet to say that when we're watching the movie, we're hearing Ross Garren play the harmonica, with Timmy playing live at least on the song When I Was Young, I Left Home. But to find out if Timothée Chalamet is a good harmonica player, the easiest thing to do is just to ask point blank.
Is Timothée Chalamet a good harmonica player?
No, he's He's just a beginner, maybe working his way to intermediate now since the film, since he's put in so much time. He's not a great player. He's an average player. I kind of developed a lot of respect for Timmy because he really wanted to learn the stuff. He didn't want to just say, I'm an actor and I want to hold it the right way.
Well, what does it mean exactly to be a good harmonica player? And do you need to be a good harmonica player in order to play Bob Dylan well? In other words, is Bob Dylan a good harmonica player?
Is Bob Dylan a good harmonica player?
For his style, he's fantastic. You know, I would consider that a folk harmonica player. He's not a great harmonica player technique-wise, you know, like Howard Levy and John Popper and Toots Thielemans and Paul Butterfield. He's not in that league, but he's in a league of songwriters that use harmonica, and he obviously influenced guys like Bruce Springsteen and Neil Young and Tom Petty, Alanis Morissette even, you know, using it as a color with their songs. So he's not a great harmonica player, no. And I bet he would be the first one to admit that.
That's a fact that Bob Dylan has mentioned both in his book and in interviews. Now, you might not know the name Mickey Raphael, but if you've ever listened to Willie Nelson, then you've heard the harmonica playing of Mickey Raphael, Willie Nelson's lifelong harmonica player. When Willie Nelson and Bob Dylan toured together, Mickey Raphael would often sit in on a few songs with Bob Dylan. And when Bob Dylan would introduce him, talking about the harmonica, he would say, I play the thing, but this guy is a virtuoso. So Bob Dylan is very clear and self-aware about his harmonica playing. And you gotta remember, in 1960, there was no online beginner to boss course, where I take you step by step from total beginner to total boss at harmonica.com. And how's that for a seamless sales pitch? In his book Chronicles Volume 1, Bob Dylan talks about his time in Minneapolis before he moved to New York City when he was 19. There was another harmonica player named Tony Glover, who played more in the style of Sonny Terry and Little Walter. Dylan writes that he was not interested in that. He preferred keeping it simple. Says he may have been the only harmonica player in the Midwest who was using a rack, which he had found in the basement of a music store still in its box from 1948. Glover's playing was known and talked about around town, but nobody commented on mine. The only comment that I ever got was a few years later in John Lee Hooker's hotel room on Lower Broadway in New York City. Sonny Boy Williamson was there, and he heard me playing and said, "Boy, you play too fast." Okay, so we've heard the bad, but is that really the whole story, or is there more to uncover here? I mentioned in the intro to this video my response to people asking for a Dylan lesson of just blow and draw haphazardly and you've got it. I've also called his tone shrill and strident. These cavalier attitudes of mine were challenged by an Instagram post I saw recently from Ross Garren. I had the incredible fortune to play Dylan's harmonica parts for this upcoming film, and it's been one of the largest undertakings of my harmonica career. I learned so much and gained so much respect for Dylan's playing in the process and feel like a deeper musician and player for it. Ross recorded harmonica for over 30 pre-production songs, painstakingly transcribing everything note for note. So when it comes to Bob Dylan's harmonica playing, we'd be hard-pressed to find a more expert opinion to listen to.
To parody him would not be very difficult. Huff and puff up a storm, you know, in first position, and you might just kind of say you're doing a Bob Dylan imitation. But what I found is there's a lot more to it than that. He strikes me as a guy that's just very obviously brilliant out of his mind.
Bob Dylan is one of the most brilliant American songwriters of the 20th century. He won both the Nobel Prize and the Pulitzer Prize for Literature. Show me another songwriter who's done that. Bob Dylan isn't famous for his singing, his guitar playing, or his harmonica playing. He's famous for the magical songs he's written.
I don't know how I got to write those songs. There's a magic to that. It's a different kind of a penetrating magic. And, you know, I did it at one time.
I've always been hugely inspired by Bob Dylan's songs, but I've never been particularly inspired by his harmonica playing. Here again, Ross Garren is challenging me.
I find him to be a really inspiring harmonica player. He does a lot of things really, really well. He gets a lot of moods and feelings that complement his wide-ranging songs really, really well. And so I'd say I think he is a great harmonica player. You know, I think he is a phenomenal musician for sure, and he uses the harmonica really effectively in a lot of contexts. You know, he is an essential architect for a sort of non-blues based rock.
And what about my critique of Dylan's tone, playing too loud and too strident?
I realize, like, a lot of times those rack players, the harp is closer to the microphone than their voice.
Right.
So, like, because you hear these recordings where that harp is just blasting, man. And those are early Dylan recordings. I believe he's doing them all live.
I think it's also interesting to note that the harmonica played a huge role in Bob Dylan's early career. When the 19-year-old Dylan arrived to Greenwich Village in 1960, the first gig he landed was with a singer named Freddie Neal, who ran the daytime show at the Café Wah. He asked me to play something. After about a minute, he said I could play harmonica with him during his sets. I was ecstatic. At least it was a place to stay out of the cold. This was good. And his first studio gig was playing harmonica on the iconic Harry Belafonte's album, Midnight Special. Astoundingly, and as unbelievable as it might have seemed, I'd be making my professional recording debut with Harry Belafonte playing harmonica. So the harmonica plays a pivotal role in Bob Dylan's transition from Midwestern boy to international icon. Ross Garren points out that for your average person, even your average music producer, when you say the word harmonica, the first person to pop into their mind is Bob Dylan. He's an essential architect of non-blues rock harmonica. Has Bob Dylan inspired a whole generation of people to pick up the harmonica?
I can't believe I'm about to play a harmonica that Bob Dylan played.
Even Willie Nelson's harmonica player, Mickey Raphael, whom we heard earlier in this video, was first inspired to pick up the harmonica by Bob Dylan. So was I wrong? Yes, I was wrong. Well, yes and no. It's not all about technical chops. Think about the musicians and artists that we most love. B.B. King is one of my favorite guitar players, and there's countless players who are technically more advanced than him. Ross Garren's advice to all harmonica players, even if you're not going to learn anything note for note, is to listen to his first two albums, the self-titled Bob Dylan, and then his second album, the freewheelin' Bob Dylan.
Yeah, I think Freewheelin' and Bob Dylan, those two records, the technique, not so impressive.
Right.
The scope and effectiveness, super impressive. And so to hear the whole record gives you the scope, I guess, you know.
On the other hand, if you do want to learn some Bob Dylan stuff note for note, you can check it out right here.